A culture's teachings, and most importantly the nature of its people, achieve definition in conflict. They find themselves or find themselves lacking.
Star Wars is arguably one of the greatest franchises of all time, and it certainly has had its ups and downs. But with a few adjustments, Disney can make sure that it will never ever have downs again. And in this video, I will explain how.
Since 2012, unfortunately or fortunately depending on how you look at it, Star Wars has been under the control of the Disney Corporation. With the release of the Sequel Trilogy, a trilogy which many call egregious, LucasFilms has been turning the tide around with the successful content such as The Mandalorian, The Clone Wars Season 7, The Bad Batch, and The High Republic, along with some future content such as Ahsoka, Kenobi, and the Book of Boba Fett. There's still a problem that is ultimately a core-rotting problem that makes these shows and stories they create simply pointless. The Sequel Trilogy timeline where the First Order rises, or at the very least the despairing nihilism that comes with it. But hope, a term I've never felt in the Rise of Skywalker, the sequel's finale, persists. With the success of Star Wars Visions, an anthology series that focused on out-of-main continuity stories, there's been an increasingly loud call for new material that splinters off from the current canon, such as the old Expanded Universe Legends timeline, recontinuing and concluding abandoned stories such as Sword of the Jedi Trilogy, the Legacy comics, and events after the Crucible. But that still leaves a ton of stories that were filled with hope that would be squashed by the sequel saga, such as the Bloodlines novel that ruined Leia's legacy with the New Republic and amplifies why the sequel's trilogy ending is a hopeless, self-destructive route for the galaxy far, far away. Despite The Mandalorian, we're still going to witness the fall of Ben Solo and the destruction of the new Jedi Order into the sequel trilogy. And even with the announcement of a follow-up focusing on Rey reforming the Jedi Order, there's no real foundation that she's going to make the necessary changes and adaptations the Order needs to survive and failures of the two other orders. As such, I do respect those who do love the sequel trilogy, and I'm not calling for its destruction, but it should be, considering there's already a way to split the timeline once more into a third timeline for the Star Wars universe. And because of this, I've decided to give you a good idea for Star Wars' future and a way for everybody to win. Star Wars is enjoying a new surge of popularity thanks to the various shows on Disney+, a success that eluded the House of Mouse when it released its lackluster trilogy of Star Wars films. The new trilogy received a lukewarm reception, and that's being kind of generous, with some fans giving up on the beloved franchise and feeling as though the magic were gone. Thankfully, Disney seems to be back on track thanks to new programs like The Mandalorian, The Bad Batch, Star Wars Visions, and the upcoming Ahsoka series. However, as exciting as these new properties are, I like to make the case for a third timeline. Just imagine a new set of series led into a future that bypasses episodes 7 through 9. Like the wise words of Master Yoda,
difficult to see. Always in motion is the future.
And sit back as I explain why Star Wars needs a third timeline, the ease with which it could be implemented, and the benefits it could bestow to Disney, the millions of Star Wars fans right now, and the future fans. The Star Wars franchise has a rich history of expanded tie-ins, the result of George Lucas's incredible vision about the power of merchandising. You've likely heard the story about how Lucas negotiated the merchandising rights to Star Wars, a move that seemed minor at the time to studio executives, but which proved to be lucrative when the film took off and Lucas made a fortune off Star Wars merchandise. The beauty of the Star Wars universe lies in just that, the fact that it's set in an immense galaxy setting full of planets and civilizations, along with the core set of characters that the public just can't get enough of. This was evident from the start, beginning with the aforementioned Star Wars comic book adaptation, followed by the new adventures published by Marvel. Best seen in novels such as the Han Solo Adventures trilogy and Splinter of the Mind's Eye, the Star Wars comic strip, National Public Radio's radio adaptation of the original trilogy, TV series such as the Ewoks Adventure, Droids, and a certain holiday special which should not be named. This was just the beginning, however, as fans would not let Star Wars fade away after Return of the Jedi, and spin-off media such as Marvel's Star Wars comics was cancelled. The so-called dark times between 1987 and 1991 made it seem as though fans would have to settle for the films. However, 1991's publication of the novel Heir to the Empire gave fans just what they wanted, and there was no end to the new material as more novels, comics, video games, and the ambitious Shadow of the Empire's multimedia project prepared fans for the special edition release of the original trilogy. Anyone familiar with these works knows that they not only introduce new characters such as Mara Jade and Admiral Thrawn and others, but develop backstories for existing characters. Whether you call Star Wars science fiction, science fantasy, space western, or just plain fun, it shares the fantastic elements of other entertainment mediums like Marvel Comics, DC Comics, and Star Trek, one of them being alternate timelines. Alternate timelines are all but rare, but it wasn't until the 20th century that they entered pop culture. The idea of a parallel world changed by one or more historical divergences led to fascinating stories as characters from one world met their mirror images in another. For example, comic book fans are aware of DC Comics' Silver Age introduction of Earth 2, a world where the comic book characters originally published lived. When DC decided its universe was too complicated for new readers, it rebuilt it with the Crisis on Infinite Earths maxi-series. DC has repeated this on 2 occasions, its New 52 reboot followed by its Rebirth reboot. We'll examine the mechanics of this later. Likewise, Marvel Comics had explored alternate universes as seen in the Silver Age, when the Avengers encountered a world where their counterparts defeated the world's superheroes after being duped by a time traveler. Marvel would revisit parallel worlds numerous times, culminating in the 1970s comic series What If, which explored divergent realities in each issue. While Marvel has not rebooted its universe, its recent Secret Wars series incorporated popular characters from its Ultimate line, a reminder of its willingness to mash up fan-favorite storylines and characters. Star Trek established the Mirror Universe during the 2nd season of the original series, including the episode Mirror Mirror, where several members of the USS Enterprise were stranded in an alternate world where the Federation was replaced by a militaristic empire. This alternate universe would be explored in future Trek series Deep Space Nine, Enterprise, and Discovery. So clearly, there is a precedent for taking existing properties and breathing new life into them via the concept of parallel universes. The question now is whether Star Wars needs to do this, and if so, what are the advantages and disadvantages of doing so? It's safe to say, though, that Disney's acquisition of the Star Wars franchise and its subsequent production of episodes 7 through 9 have left fans with mixed feelings, including complaints that the new trilogy is highly derivative of the original trilogy, that they were unfaithful to the Star Wars concept, and had a much darker tone than other Star Wars films. Factoring in complaints about poor storytelling and that fans were disappointed, and you get a pretty good idea of the relationship between Disney and Star Wars fans. Reports of Disney's rewriting and reshooting of the films have only compounded the perception that a Disney Star Wars were nothing more than a cash grab. As mentioned, Disney's TV properties have restored fans' enjoyments of Star Wars, but it's still impossible to escape the future of episodes 7 through 9. Fans who enjoy programs like The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett have to cringe when they think of the future that awaits their beloved Star Wars characters. Let's face it, it's difficult to get invested in a franchise knowing that a bleak future awaits its characters, but thankfully, this need not happen. If other franchises have rebooted themselves or created an alternate universe, why can't Star Wars? There are so many options, including the concept of the future being changed, the events of episodes 7 through 9 occurring in a parallel universe that can still be explored for the Sequel Trilogy fans, or even bring about a full multiverse. Now, there are a number of reasons for a third timeline, including greater creative freedom, a chance to get away from the nihilism of the third trilogy, an incentive for big-name creators to work on the franchise, a means of attracting new fans, a way to tell new stories with classic and original characters, and of course, money. A third timeline would open the door for more creative freedom. With the bulk of Star Wars material set during the events leading up to Episode 4 and after Episode 6, it makes sense for the creative team to be able to chart their own version of the future rather than being handcuffed by the future depicted in the third trilogy. While Disney can always count on finding writers willing to work on Star Wars, there is something special about painting on a fresh canvas. The third trilogy's nihilism could also be avoided with a third timeline. While Star Wars has depicted some dark times, such as the Revenge of the Sith and The Empire Strikes Back, the tone and mood of episodes 7 to 9 have disturbed fans and taken Star Wars' elements of hope and optimism and transformed them into a dystopian environment, not to mention its confusing elements such as reckoning Luke Skywalker's reasons for going into seclusion as well as the mystery of race parentage. A third timeline can depict the evil faced by Star Wars' various heroes, without turning into a nightmarish world of doom and gloom. It can also provide a more structured and logical timeline as a showrunner guides the various series storylines. The opportunity to work in an open world might prove tantalizing for more big-name creators to work in the Star Wars galaxy. Disney Plus has brought in top creative talents who understand and respect what made the original trilogy so special. Names like Jon Favreau, Bryce Howard, and Robert Rodriguez are already working on Disney Plus's Star Wars series, and that could only be the beginning. Traditionally, those with creative talent are more willing to work on a property where they have the freedom to work with their characters rather than being stuck adhering to a concrete future. And that's not to say that said talent has the freedom to destroy existing characters, but they will for sure have a much more open sandbox to play in. A third timeline is also a way of attracting new fans. While Star Wars has a dedicated fan base, they're also an aging fan base, and it's crucial for Disney to attract new fans if they want to keep the franchise afloat. The creativity seen in Disney Plus's Star Wars programs shows that creators have found a way to keep existing fans while also attracting new fans with other genres such as Star Wars Vision's anime. This all makes Star Wars a timeless property when its creators adhere to the franchise's core values, while also avoiding falling into a formula, which is a very, very thin line, which they do balance on pretty well. By attracting new fans, a third timeline could also explore new adventures in other mediums such as comic books, novels, and video games. The franchise's success with these and other mediums has established that there is a market for even more Star Wars than what is shown on films and on TV. At some point, this could include films that incorporate new characters such as the Mandalorian, as well as classic characters like Luke Skywalker and Han Solo. This could be accomplished by CGI, as seen with Luke Skywalker in The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett, or even potentially recasting these characters. All of these reasons supporting the case for a third timeline ultimately leads to Disney's biggest goal, the maximum monetization of the Star Wars franchise. Like the dark side of the Force, this is a very dangerous path to consider, and Disney's failures with its initial films suggest it can't greenlight every Star Wars property or milk it dry. However, if Disney can exercise caution, it can bring back lapsed fans, keep existing fans, and even create a new generation of fans to keep Star Wars going for a long time to come. However, while a third timeline has a number of potential benefits, what are the risks involved if Disney pursues this course? Clearly, there are reasons why Disney might not want to pursue a third timeline. These include the belief that a third timeline might confuse a lot of fans, that it could dilute the Star Wars market, and that could even alienate existing fans, much like the third trilogy did. On the surface, a third timeline might be kind of confusing to fans, but only on the surface. We've already looked at the franchises that have successfully rebooted their universes, so why would Star Wars be any different? The argument can be made that Star Wars has already rebooted itself, as seen with the decades of expanded universe works being labeled as legends. Furthermore, Disney has already gone ahead and altered its new canon, with the website The Direct noting the retcon found in the Bad Batch cartoon. Quote, "The first big alteration to the storyline came when novel Ahsoka's prologue was retconned by the Siege of Mandalore arc in the Clone Wars' final season." End quote. Would this mean that Disney is essentially stuck with episodes 7 through 9? I'd say that Disney's willingness to play with the post-Legends canons shows that it's not afraid to change things up for the sake of a good story and, of course, monetizing the franchise in a way that appeases the fans. And while Disney might be willing, they may only be willing to go so far when it comes to changes, refraining from making radical changes to the canon. Here, the concern would be in diluting the Star Wars market. Some might argue that while Star Wars has a lucrative market with adaptations like comic books, novels, and video games, the casual audience expects the TV and film projects to adhere to a consistent narrative. Otherwise, this core product would be diluted. There's a case to be made that every franchise has a saturation point, but Disney can avoid this by spacing out its new material and maintaining high levels of quality control. Tied in with this is the concern that a third timeline might confuse the casual fans. Star Wars has a solid fan base that is pretty well versed in the saga's intricacies throughout various mediums, but executives at Disney are concerned with the idea that the majority of the TV audience might not understand what is happening. As such, a third timeline might be seen as just too confusing. The counter-arguments to this is that the audiences are often more sophisticated than they're given credit for, and the number of hardcore Star Wars fans should not be underestimated. If Disney opts to adopt a third timeline, how would it go about doing so? It's not the only question either, as Disney would also have to ascertain which mediums would adopt the new timeline and how to label the third timeline. There are seemingly an infinite number of ways to change the past and future in the genres of science fiction and fantasy, so it's not a question of if, but a question of what would be the most plausible method in the Star Wars universe, and of course the most entertaining one. For example, time travel, which has been explored in Star Wars. As detailed in the Wikipedia article on time travel in Star Wars, while time travel was an exceedingly rare phenomenon, a few cases were partially documented. No record of deliberate, physical time travel is known. All known cases involved unusual hyperdrive malfunctions, the effects of the Force, or similar exotic events. And although these instances were part of the Star Wars Legend universe, they are not the only example of time travel. Fans of the show Rebels will recall the episode A World Between Worlds, which revealed a Jedi temple beneath which lay a powerful portal. As described by The Hollywood Reporter, it was a giant portal which acted as a gateway to any moment or place in the entire universe. As Ezra wandered the infinite paths, voices from the past and present of Star Wars echoed through space. It was a startlingly moving moment and one that changed everything. The temple's power to alter time led to speculation that Rise of Skywalker would employ it to bring Emperor Palpatine back. This didn't happen, but it's a viable option for Disney to change the third trilogy's fatalistic future. Perhaps, a character such as Ahsoka might foresee the destruction of Master Skywalker's new Jedi Temple and undertake a mission to alter the future. It could even be something as simple as Skywalker being warned about the Emperor's existence and taking whatever steps are necessary to rectify the unfinished business. There are other ways of traversing time as well, including hyperdrive malfunction. Might someone from the future of The Force Awakens travel back to the setting depicted in The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett, alerting them to the dire days ahead? If so, this could lead to Disney creating a new pathway for the characters in Disney Plus's Star Wars program. Another way of warning the present of the dire future is through flow walking, which can enable a Force user to not only see the past and future, but to leave an imprint elsewhere. Might Master Skywalker or even Rey send a distress signal to the past? I've explained the reason why Disney should consider a third timeline, and now it's time to show how to implement it in a way that satisfies Star Wars fans with a plausible story and one that provides an entertaining and exciting event. After all, the worst thing Disney could do would be to implement a third universe off-screen. Imagine how fans would react if Disney altered reality without the character's knowledge, or even worse, did so in a wonky way such as saying the future was just a bad dream. But of course, anything as dramatic as altering the story requires a grand gesture and one that can bring in the dollars. But let's be frank, Disney isn't in the business of creating Star Wars material just to exercise its creative muscles, and changing the future would be a wonderful way of setting things right. Disney has the option of doing so in a film or in its Disney Plus platform, but I believe there's only one way to go, with a limited series. The failure of Solo, A Star Wars Story, motivated Disney to air Star Wars related material on its streaming services rather than telling the stories on film. You may already know that Disney wanted to do a Boba Fett film, but opted out to pursue on a streaming service due to Solo's lackluster box office performance. Although The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett are popular shows, it's unknown if they would actually translate into successful films at this point. Disney shouldn't chance it, and instead it should use the limited series I am proposing to tell the story of how a new timeline is created. In the unlikely event the series fails, Disney won't have to deal with an expensive film flop, which would be costly not only in terms of the higher budget for a movie, but another dent in the Star Wars franchise's prestige. Disney Plus's streaming shows have maintained solid production values, so there should be no problem in telling the story I am about to propose. My working title is Star Wars: Future Imperfect, which assembles some of our most popular characters into an 8-part adventure that sees them try to stop the events of episodes 7 through 9. The core characters will include Boba Fett, Fennec Shand, The Mandalorian, Ahsoka, Cobb Vanth, Grogu, Bo-Katan Kryze, and the Night Owls. Other favorites will appear in more limited but sometimes crucial roles. Disney might even enlist cameos from original trilogy characters like Chewbacca, Lando, and C-3PO. Naturally, the heroes won't have an easy time accompanying their quest and face considerable opposition, including from Moff Gideon, IG-88, Grand Admiral Thrawn, and of course, the Emperor, who the heroes do not directly face, but who directs things from his hidden base on Exegol. This includes his use of dark side attempts, clones, and seemingly endless supply of stormtroopers that exist, even after the Empire has fallen. The story begins with Ahsoka having a vision of the future where the First Order rises up, Ben Solo betrays the Jedi, and the Emperor is still alive. Luke Skywalker is skeptical and reminds her that the future is always uncertain. However, she knows of time travel and decides to find the time portal. But unfortunately, the Emperor senses this as well. He's barely alive on Exegol, but his uncanny ability to foresee the future tells him his plans are now in jeopardy. Ahsoka considers the time portal once located beneath the Jedi Temple. Master Yoda's Force Ghost tells her that there are Jedi holoclones that will give her the knowledge to find its new location, but there isn't enough time to retrieve them all by herself, so she assembles her 3 teams. Palpatine reaches out to his minions, who in turn alert Moff of the importance of finding the holocrons, lying to him that he will destroy the Jedi. Gideon informs Grand Admiral Thrawn, who decides the New Republic must be kept at bay in order for the holocrons to be found without any assistance. He stages a feint to distract the majority of their forces, effectively depriving the adventures of any significant assistance. Luke Skywalker is reluctant to alter the future, but he realizes the gravity of the situation, especially if it's true that the Emperor has survived. He travels to Dagobah, where he discovers the first holocron, battling dark-side ghosts who torment him with visions of his failure with Ben Solo. The other 2 teams journey to Hoth and the ruins of Tatooine. Moff Gideon does not know where the holocrons are, but dispatches bounty hunters to help find the adventurers. 2 of the 3 holocrons are gathered after harrowing adventures, but Gideon obtains the 3rd. He doesn't destroy it as he wants to see if he can use it for his own ambitions. This allows the strike team to attack his flagship and retrieve it. Gideon pursues the team and follows them to the planet where the portal is located. Realizing time is running short, Gideon orders an orbital bombardment, but Rogue Squadron shows up joined by a motley group of starfighters, such as including ones commanded by Bo-Katan Kryze and the Night Owls. Our heroes make their way to the portal where Ahsoka discovers it will take a great sacrifice to restore the portal. Luke Skywalker wants to enter the portal, but Ahsoka tells him he is needed to build a new Jedi Academy. Furthermore, Luke's battles on Dagobah have weakened him too much. Ahsoka restores the portal, knowing her time is limited, and witnesses the many windows to the past and future. She is confronted by Darth Vader from her past and the Emperor from Episode 6. She prevents the Emperor from escaping the second Death Star, effectively destroying him. She leaves the portal as she ages tremendously. As she dies, she tells everyone the future is now a blank slate. Disney could also go with having Grogu heal Ahsoka. Luke Skywalker recalls Yoda's wisdom about the future and he knows it is his to make. Luke knows that a new menace will eventually arise, but he knows that the Emperor has been destroyed forever. In turn, the audience knows that the new adventures await and the Star Wars franchise is no longer trapped by the grim future depicted in the 3rd trilogy. Alternate realities and timelines are commonplace now in science fiction and the general public. There is a proven history that the audience enjoys quality stories told in alternate universes, and it is a useful way to entertain existing fans and new fans. While a 3rd timeline may seem confusing initially, largely to Disney executives, it has proven track record amongst fandom and would be no more incredible than the concept of the Force or an orbiting Death Star. Disney need not dwell on the new timeline status as a 3rd timeline, and instead a process, as if the future is for fans to discover. I'd honestly call that a win-win situation. Whether you wanted to call it a new timeline or simply a new path for the dwellers of the Star Wars universe to journey on, a blank slate opens the door for so much more than the franchise can do right now. As mentioned, Disney could eventually expand Star Wars into a new series of films, something that would be much more profitable than a streaming service. It could even go to the route of HBO Max and release Star Wars films on Disney Plus and in theaters simultaneously. Films like Star Wars are still seen as worth the added expense of a movie ticket and leaving the comfort of your house. At the same time, Disney Plus can continue telling new adventures with its existing programs. I've made the case for a third timeline, but what do you think? Should Disney go ahead and change the bleak future of the episodes 7 through 9 while still keeping it a separate continuity, or is this a fool's errand? Do you think my idea is the best thing since The Mandalorian, or is this generation's Star Wars holiday special? I'm joking, but essays like these are basically subjective. Let me know in the comments below what you think, and thank you for watching.